I turned the music down. I don't know what her problem is.
It's just unbearable. The situation is just intolerable.
This old lady asked me to turn down the stereo, and I do, and the next thing I know, she's calling me names and embarrassing me in front of my parents.
This invasion, I will say, it really is an invasion of a neighborhood.
The next thing I know, she's hanging out of a window, yelling at me, and there go my parents. And
well, I don't see why you can't have those parties somewhere else.
I work really hard for that place, and I don't need anyone interfering with me.
Ms. Veranda, Mr. Moran, thank you very much for coming to the center this evening. My name is Michael Lewis, and I will spend the next however long it takes to help the two of you resolve the difficulty that brought you down here. I'm called a mediator in this session, and that means simply that I am a person who has no authority or power to make either of you do anything. What I'm here to do is to try and get you talking about that. Let me say at the outset that I will not voluntarily say anything about what goes on in here outside of this room. I may occasionally wish to speak with one of you alone. I may on occasion want to sit in here by myself and sort of go over my notes. Those notes will be torn up at the end of the hearing, so you should have no worry that somehow I'm making a record that is going to end up in some file someplace. Both of you will get a chance to speak this evening, and in that regard I ask you please to give the other the courtesy of allowing him or her to finish whatever it is that you're saying and not interrupt. You may hear things that you disagree with, and rather than interrupting at that point, I ask you please to just jot a note down on the paper here. But you should both be comfortable in knowing that I will make sure that you both have a chance to say to me and to each other what seems important to you. If there is an agreement this evening, and I fully expect that there will be, I will try and write that agreement down in your language, in your words. You both get a chance to look at any agreement and tell me that I've written it down incorrectly or whatever, and we'll make the changes so that you're both satisfied, and I'll give you both a copy of it. Are there any questions about anything I've said thus far?
No, I guess not.
Mr. Moran?
I don't have any questions.
Okay, fine. The way we usually start a mediation like this is to ask the person who really sort of started this thing going to speak. And I know that Ms. Veranda, you filed a report with the police, so let me ask you, if you would, please tell us what brought you down here this evening.
Well, you know, I've been to the police and I've asked them many times and called them out on this disturbance, and nothing seems to happen, and it just goes on just the way it was before. And last time I went down to the station and complained about these intolerable situations, why they said, well, you can take it to court. And I said, well, I don't have money for a lawyer. What can I do? You know? And the officer down there said, well, there is a mediation process, and that we might be able to resolve this with your help. But I'm at a loss, I really am. I don't know what to do.
Okay. Well, you've mentioned disturbances and you've been to the police. Tell me a
you,
little more about that, if you would.
Well, I've been here a long time. I've lived in this area for 15 years, you know, and I live alone. And it's always been a nice, quiet neighborhood. It's mostly the noise, I think, and the late parties and the very loud music, you know, and this man brings in that motorcycle and revs it up, and I think he knows that I'm going to bed at about 10 o'clock. You know. I think he does it just to annoy. And it's the loud parties. They've been going on. Well, heaven knows what goes on in there, really, you know. It just goes on, and I call the police and ask them to tone it down, and nothing ever happens, and it's just the same. In fact, it's worse the next time. Of course, the last awful thing that happened was when my neighbor knocked on my door and called me up and said, do you know what's going on outside? And I said, no. So you better get out there and see. And so I ran out, and They were running off with a red can of paint with a dripping red brush, and what do you think was on that door? My door. I can hardly bring myself to say it. I love sex. That's when I went down to the station. That's just too much. It's just unbearable. The situation is just intolerable.
Mr. Moran, let me ask you. I gather from the conversation that you were a neighbor of Ms. Miranda's. How long have you lived in the neighborhood?
Well, it's been around 6 months or so.
Okay. Tell me from your point of view, what brought you down here?
Well, what brought me down here, she brought me down here.
Okay.
I haven't done anything. I've done what I would normally do. I've had a nice social life at home, and this old lady asked me to turn down the stereo, and I do, and the next thing I know, she's calling me names and embarrassing me in front of my parents.
Well, you said that Ms. Miranda called you names in front of your parents, but that also, perhaps maybe an important thing that you just mentioned in passing was that the two of you had spoken about the music, and you thought that it had been taken care of.
I turned the music down. I don't know what her problem is.
When you say that Ms. Miranda dragged you down here tonight, what is it that you expect to happen this evening?
To stay out of court.
Okay, and how do you think that might happen?
Well, I kind of figured just by being here I'd stay out of court.
Okay. Is there anything that you want out of this mediation session this evening other than staying out of court?
Be nice if I could live in my house the way I see fit.
Okay, so you'd like to stay out of court, and you'd like to be able to enjoy your house as you would.
I work really hard for that
Okay.
place, and I don't need anyone interfering with me.
Okay.
That's the bottom line.
Miss Miranda, what would you like to see happen this evening? What
I
did
would
you
like to see
expect?
him move out.
Okay.
I think this is an invasion.
Okay. And what else?
Well, of course, before he goes, he has to repaint that door.
Assuming, just for the second, that Mr. Moran either chooses not to or can't move out. Perhaps he has a lease and he's in the middle of it. And besides, he likes his house. What things would you then want to see worked out so that both of you can enjoy your homes and with minimal disruption of your neighbors?
Well, of course, that door, the first thing. A little respect for my age, and the fact that I was there first, and that we've never had such trouble in the neighborhood before. Well, I don't see why you can't have those parties somewhere else. Why do they have to be, why do they have to go on so long? I mean, and what's going on there, too? I was sort of glad then when I called the police that they went over there and looked in the house. I don't know what they found. I never heard anything about that, but goodness knows what goes on there. And then to put that paint on my door is really too much. Should have gone on his, of course.
Mr. Moran, is there anything else that you would like to come out this evening?
You know, I really feel like what she's suggesting is that I stay in prison but don't go to court. Putting a curfew on me, regulating the kind of hours I keep at home.
Well, one of the things that it is important for both of you to talk about, at least at the outset, is what you'd like to have happen. That doesn't necessarily mean that what you want to have happen will happen. I mean, you heard Ms. Miranda say that she'd be happiest
I just want to be left
if you
alone.
weren't there. I understand, but I think that if you turned to Ms. Miranda and said, what would you like to come out of this evening, she would say, please leave me alone. Obviously, we have a situation in which lifestyles, if you will, are clashing a little bit, and the question is whether the two of you can, through this mediation or other ways, figure out a way to to sort of coexist. And
People who lived there before weren't like that.
I'm not people like there who were there before.
Okay, well, you're right. Do either of you have anything else to say at this point? I think that I'd like to sit back and go over my notes and ask you both to go out to the waiting room for just a couple of minutes. Do you have anything else at this point? Okay, if you would, please, just go out to the waiting room just for a couple of minutes, and I will come out, probably ask to speak to one of you. Ms. Miranda, thank you for waiting. I hope it hasn't been too long. I just wanted to talk with you a little more about what's been going on in the neighborhood. Before I do, let me repeat what I said earlier when we were all in here together, and that is that I will not repeat anything you say to me outside of this room without your permission, and that includes things that you might want to say to me that you don't feel free to say to Mr. Moran. It sounds as if the enjoyment of your home has really decreased in the last 6 months or so.
Oh, yes, it's really intolerable.
When we were all in here talking together, Mr. Moran said that when he first moved in, you talked to him about at least the loud music, I guess, and he said, and of course I don't know